Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fifth, I can't believe it, a session of PowerCat's new AI webinar series. For those of you who were at our last sessions, well, welcome back. And for anyone new, welcome. We're happy to have you. I'm your host, Ashley, one of the hosts, and I'm just going to be in the background answering questions, helping making sure everything runs smoothly. And then our two speakers are Mark Fougat and Steve Jeffrey, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yep. Hi. So my name's Mark Fougat. I'm one of the cloud solution architects at Microsoft in the UK. I work within the data security team, so primarily focused around Microsoft Purview and all the functionality that's in there.
And I'm Steve Jeffrey. So I'm a program manager in the PowerCat team, and I'm also based in the UK with Mark. Today's session is not just about data governance or architecture. It's about how we build the kind of environment where AI can thrive safely, ethically, and at scale. And the truth is that most of the challenges that we face with AI are not really about the AI itself. They're more about the data underneath. So today's session, we're going to explore how we shift from reactive data concerns to proactive data readiness. And we're going to try and do it through a lens that's hopefully a little bit more memorable than your average kind of compliance checklist. Excuse me. Right, so this chart shows the results from the last session that I presented where we were talking about AI risks. And I asked you a question about what was your single biggest fear around AI. And what stood out was data leaks, misinformation, trust. So they weren't really technical issues. They weren't about model failures or hallucinations or regulations. The risks that you seem to fear the most were data related. And that's actually really good news because it means that the path to having responsible and scalable AI starts in a place that you already know how to work with, and that's your data ecosystem. And that's exactly where we're going today. So let's take a quick step back and reflect on what we've just seen in that poll. The top concern wasn't about AI making the wrong decision. It wasn't about ethics or job displacement. It was about data breaches. And when I asked you a follow-up question, which was, what action would you or your organization take in response to an AI-related issue? The most common answer was simple and very telling, and that was that you would turn it off. And I mean, that's a really human response. It comes from a place of uncertainty and risk avoidance. But here's the thing. Most of those fears are not really about AI itself. They're about the data that AI is accessing, how it's interpreting it, and what it's exposing. So it's not like we mistrust the algorithm as much as you mistrust what might be inside the data. So who has access to it? Where does it come from? And what might it expose or infer? And that seems to be the heart of it. So take a look at this tidal pool or a rock pool, depending where you are. It's calm, it's contained, and it feels safe and manageable compared to like the ocean that kind of stretches out beyond it. Now, if we think about our organization's data, like the vast ocean represents all of the data that you have. It's complex, it's expansive, it's often intimidating. It's filled with unknowns and potential risks. But when it comes to creating effective AI solutions, we don't need to tame the entire ocean. Instead, you can carefully create your own tidal pool. You can select, you can isolate and curate just the right data. Now, this tidal pool, it has clear boundaries. It's secure, it's understandable, and it supports its own ecosystem. Now, in the same way, our AI data foundations can be clearly defined, they can be clearly managed, and also monitored. And we can address the concerns around security, privacy, transparency, and trust. Let's pause for a quick moment And imagine that this tidal pool is yours. You've been asked to support it, to protect it, and to help life thrive there. So the question would be, what would you do first? Would you test the water? Would you build a barrier around it? Would you clear it out? Would you map the creatures that are already living there? Or would you set rules about, what can come in and what can't? You see, the first instinct that many people have isn't to add something new. It's to understand what's already there. And this is where the metaphor connects directly to our work with AI and data. Because before we can build responsibly, before we apply AI to our systems, to decisions, or to customer journeys, we need to understand what already exists in our environments. So this is always the first step. Before we add anything new, before we set rules, before we connect to other tidal pools, we need to understand what we already have, what's living in our tidal pool already. And this is exactly the work of building a good data inventory. Because every organization already has data flowing into their tidal pools. Some of it is intentional, some of it is accidental, and some of it you don't even know about. Some of it could be clean and healthy, some of it might be risky. But you see, you can't govern what you can't see, and you can't protect what you don't know exists. And you most definitely can't build solutions or build AI on data that you don't understand. So this is very much foundational work. It isn't glamorous. But once we have it, once we know what's living inside our tidal pools, everything else becomes easier. We can start to set smarter rules, we can manage risk better, and you can design AI solutions with confidence. So why do we go to all of this effort? Why does a deep and well-maintained inventory matter, especially when we think about AI? It matters because every one of these questions on this slide is probably going to get asked at some point. Not by me and not by your governance team, but by your business leaders or your risk and compliance teams, or even by customers or regulators. If we walk through a couple of these questions, so what level of RAI, and RAI is responsible AI. So what level of responsible AI sensitivity is associated with each data set or data asset? This is a question about trust, and it's you demonstrating that you know where the risks are and you are handling them appropriately. Which assets are feeding AI models? This is a question about explainability, being able to trace where your model learned something. What access controls are in place? This is a question about security, being able to prove that your data isn't wide open. Which sources are safe to reuse? This is about efficiency, demonstrating that by reusing trusted assets instead of reinventing them. And then which data sets need additional oversight? This is a question about responsible governance, about that you're proving that you're protecting people's privacy, you're avoiding bias, and you're reducing harm. Now, this is why the inventory isn't just an admin exercise. It's how you scale AI safely. It's one of the ways that you move from fear to trust. And this is also about how we enable innovation without losing control. I want to come back to a simple idea that often gets overlooked, and that is that you don't need to start from scratch every time. In fact, you shouldn't. Many organizations spend a lot of the time on projects, hunting, cleaning, and approving data. Now, you're wasting valuable time there, not on AI logic, but on figuring out where the data is, what it contains, who owns it, is it of good quality, and whether you're even allowed to use it. So let's use a really simple example, the HR employee directory. If you treat it as just another data set that's sitting there in isolation, it's going to keep being re-requested, re-cleaned, and re-approved for every single use case. But what if we did the work properly and we just did it once? If we classified it, we tagged it with ownership, we applied sensitivity levels, and then we marked it as trusted and compliant, suddenly that one asset becomes a strategic building block. And it could enable many things. One team could use it in a Power App to manage onboarding. Another team might plug it into a Cloudflow to automate role-based provisioning. A third team could connect it to Power BI to analyze churn and retention trends. And maybe you could even train an agent to answer org structure related questions. So the idea is that we have one data set or one data asset that has multiple uses with zero duplication, zero new risk, and that we start to compound the value of it. And that leads us into this, which is when you treat data as being a reusable and trusted asset, it's not just a governance win, it becomes a value stream. And this starts with kind of one simple principle, really, is that you're leveraging data that's already formatted, it's already vetted and reviewed, and it's ready to go. Now, that one move, that accelerates deployment. You're not wasting cycles on discovery or cleanup. And it also reduces risk. People know what they're working with and they know that it's safe to use. Now, that's the immediate impact, but kind of what happens next? Well, those faster deployments can drive faster time to market. And when you reduce risk, you start to improve stakeholder confidence. People stop asking if it's safe to use and they start thinking about how fast they can go. And that's where you get the longer term effects. That's where they kick in. Faster time to market. Well, that means that you can take on more. It means that it increases your innovation capacity. And improved confidence means that you can scale responsibly, not just more, but smarter. And this is the shift that we want you to take from seeing data as a project input to treating it as a platform for growth. So let's build upon the concept of data assets being valuable. There are these three things: reuse, risk reduction, and trust. This is where the real payoff is. And your data inventory is the common thread between them. If we look at reuse, when you know what data you have, you can stop duplicating effort. You can build things once and you can build smarter across teams. And critically, you can make that reusable data more discoverable for other AI projects. Reducing risk, a strong inventory helps you spot risks before it spreads. It's easier to catch sensitive data that's being used in unintended ways, or to spot integrations that shouldn't even exist. And then trust. Ultimately, this is the outcome that we're all chasing. Reuse creates efficiency, risk reduction builds confidence. And that's how trust is earned, right? It's not through slogans or policies, but through consistent structure. So the more that we build for reuse, the more that you can reduce risk. And the more you reduce risk, the more people will trust your systems. And that's kind of the virtuous cycle of responsible data use. And it all starts with a clear inventory. So on the right, you'll see Microsoft's 6 responsible AI principles. I walked through these in our last session. Accountability, inclusiveness, fairness, transparency, privacy and security, and reliability and safety. And they're not abstract ideals. They're practical touchstones for how we govern every single type of asset that would appear on the left. So, for example, when you're working with structured data, maybe that HR directory that I was talking about, you need to ensure that privacy and security is kind of at the forefront and ensure that access controls and classification is in place. For prompts, as an example, we're asking, are they free from harmful bias? So have they been tested for fairness and inclusiveness? And then for custom models, we're asking deeper questions. How were they trained? What data was fed into them? Can you explain what they're doing and why? And that kind of ties into transparency and reliability, and also fairness. And this is where you start to build the bridge between good intentions and practical governance. And that's by embedding responsible AI principles into the everyday kind of reality of data asset management. So here's where we can have a bit of fun. We're going to be talking about 2 very different yet totally valid approaches to creating a compliant data inventory. So on the left, we have team one, and that's me. I'm the DIY, build it yourself kind of person. So I want to build something that's tailored, that's flexible, and probably a little bit scrappy. I'm going to be using what I have, which is the Power Platform. I'll be using automation, agents, and whatever else it takes. And then on the right, we have team two, and that's Mark. He's the cool one. He's got the polished, kind of out of the box expert representing Purview. Now we're here to kind of battle it out, but not like physically. We're going to take a few moments to kind of walk through both lenses. How mine as somebody who wants to build a custom approach to managing data, and Mark as somebody who wants to show you the power of Purview that's already done a lot of the hard work for you. Now, the point of this is not for you to pick a winner. It's to decide, what might work best for you and your organization. We're aware many of you have very, unique requirements that sometimes, a product doesn't fully meet, and you'll be keen to build your own thing. Okay. So I've spoken a bit about building a data inventory, and we'll be talking about data assets. But what do I mean when I say a data asset? We're not really just talking, structured rows in a database. It might be a custom AI builder model that's been trained on your organization's data. It could be a prompt, a prompt that's consistently delivering a reliable outcome. It could be an integration, something that maybe pulls data from SAP or ServiceNow, or even an internal or a public API. It could be a knowledge source, that's feeding your agents like a curated document. And of course, it could be Dataverse. Now, the idea here really is that reusable data assets are those things that are known, they're trusted, and they're safe to connect to. And when they're reused, they don't just save time, they bring governance with them. They carry provenance, they carry risk classification, and they carry trust. So here's from my perspective. So I'm team one, and I'm going to be talking about building a custom solution. So here's where the things start to get a little bit more real or more practical. So every AI model, every Copilot component, every prompt and data source or integration that we work with in the Power Platform, they're all being referenced in Dataverse tables within each environment. And we'll quickly break this down. So AI models, they're stored in the AI models table as our prompts. We have knowledge sources like documents and web pages. Those sit within the Copilot components table. We then have connection details for on-premise and third-party integrations. That's the connection reference table. And then, of course, we have Dataverse itself. Now, that supports, obviously a wide array of individual tables that capture kind of everything you can imagine. And this is how I would start to bring order to the chaos. I would start to create visibility and structure over these tables. So I'll get into a little bit more detail. So how would I build a custom inventory from the ground up? This isn't really, I'm not just about putting data into tables. This is about intentionally collecting the right metadata from across our Power Platform environments and making it usable, governable, and most importantly, reusable. So at the core, I would have a data inventory table. This would be our single point of truth. Everything would link back to this. And from there, I'm going to be pulling in structured metadata across a few key areas. The first is, who is the asset owner? So somebody that would be accountable for the asset, not necessarily the person that creates it. I would be pulling information from the AI model table, the Copilot components table, and the connections and the connection reference table to really build up a good picture of everything that's in my Power Platform estate. Now, this allows me to use automation and even agents to drive, validation, risk scoring and assessments and recommendations. It's very much DIY, but it's powerful. And so finally, I get to speak to Mark. Sorry, Mark, that I've spoken for 20 minutes without giving you a chance. No. But we're kind of showing how, I would build a data inventory to scan all of this information. So could you walk us through how Purview actually scans for content like this, whether it's structured data or unstructured sources like documents?
Sure. So obviously with Purview, we have the concept of what we call sensitive info types. So this would be things like credit card numbers, bank account numbers, national insurance numbers, passports, that kind of sensitive data. So if we were to take content in SharePoint, for example, there's a process that looks at that content and detects if there's any kind of sensitive data in there and makes you aware of that. So those are pretty common, but we also have what we call trainable classifiers, which use a machine learning model. So rather than just focusing on one type of data, so credit cards, for example, we can detect if it's kind of HR related data or is it bank statements. So we have some pre-trained models there already, which will look at that data and give you insight into what kind of data do you currently have in your estate. And that's the challenge for most customers. It's not knowing what they've actually got. If you take people's OneDrives, who knows what users store in their OneDrives? But we can pick that data out. So we get that insight into what data do we have, and then we can deal with, okay, how do we go about protecting that? How do we mitigate exfiltration of that data? How do we mitigate AI? How do we reduce the risk of Copilot using it in any kind of responses?
That's awesome. And what about, so if as new content comes online, is it something that it can detect automatically, or is that something that needs to be set up?
No, it can detect it automatically. So with SharePoint, it's all part of the crawling process within side of SharePoint. So obviously, if we upload a document, it needs to be indexed. As part of that indexing process, we will then do the content inspection, and we'll be able to detect what kind of sensitive data might exist. And I should add as well, you can build your own sensitive info types as well. So if you wanted to treat, contracts, for example, if you've got contract numbers and you want to treat those as sensitive data, then we can build a custom sensitive info type using regular expression as, for an example, to actually be able to detect that in documents as well.
Regular expressions. I thought we got rid of those things almost. So, okay, that's really cool. So what about in terms of the Power Platform? So as new environments or new data sources are kind of introduced, can Purview pick those up automatically, or is that a manual process?
No, it can pick them up. So Power BI, Fabric, we have controls within Purview for those already. Now it's also worth mentioning that there are technically two flavors of Purview. There's just to confuse people, we've got the kind of Microsoft Purview that everybody understands: SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange, those kind of workloads. We then have the Azure Data Governance, which is basically Purview for Azure Blob Storage, for Fabric, for Data Lake. So we can extend some of the Purview functionality across onto those additional storage locations as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So in summary then, Purview will basically capture everything that we already have. So all of the data first tables that I mentioned, we could configure it to collect that, but it also is way deeper. It's embedded into the Microsoft ecosystem, so it's far more comprehensive.
Absolutely. And, the sensitive info types that I mentioned, or using the proper term, they're called classifiers.
Right.
So on their own, they don't technically do anything. They're just a way of classifying content. However, we could then tie that into sensitivity labeling, where we give content some kind of classifier: secret, top secret, confidential, based on the type of content that is inside of that document, for example.
Right.
We can then tie that into data loss prevention. So we can say, okay, I don't want that content leaving my organization. So we can build data loss prevention into that as well. Right. So, the classifiers are really just the the way of identifying data, and then we have ways of controlling the life of that data as well through Purview.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. All right. So I'm going to move on and talk about lifecycle management, data lifecycle management. So I think, I've kind of shared my approach to building out an inventory of all of the Power Platform related assets that I would need to use or need to be concerned about. And Mark's kind of shared how Purview does the same. So what you're seeing here is a set of agents that I would develop to manage the life cycle of data across its entire journey, from initial onboarding all the way through to retirement. So I'll quickly break it down. So at the introduction or the onboarding stage, I build an accountability agent, and whoever creates what we find quite commonly with customers that the creator of something isn't always the person that's accountable for it. It could be a developer that's creating a solution for like an internal stakeholder, but they're not accountable for the actual, the data that resides within the solution. I would then build a responsible AI sensitivity evaluation agent. I'd probably call it something a bit shorter because that's quite a mouthful, but its job would be to kind of help flag whether a data asset is introducing risk, under the Microsoft's responsible AI principles. I would then build would then have a data quality monitor agent. Now, this agent, let's face it, poor data is going to equal poor AI. So its job would be to ensure that for structured data, an assessment is performed to make sure that we have good quality, there's no missing values, we're not using sensitive features, and all of those kinds of checks. And then I'd have a metadata completeness agent, just because, I'm a little bit over the top with this kind of thing, and I wouldn't want anything going into my inventory that isn't fully documented. Then at that point, the data asset is ready for people to reuse. And then I would have a data lifecycle management agent that would, would check in on relevance, potential risks, and, check in over time. So if we saw like a surge in reuse, for example, we'd probably want to ensure that data asset was reevaluated to make sure that it was still good. Now, that sounds like quite a lot of effort, and it probably is, but it would give me that kind of full flexibility, especially where I'm using the Power Platform, where the pre-built tools don't really always meet my needs. So back to you, Mark. I've lost my clicker. Hang on. There we go. So how does Purview kind of fit in with ongoing lifecycle management? So once it's detected, all of this data, what does it do to manage the life cycle of it?
Okay, so by default, nothing.
Right.
It's the answer.
I'm a winner.
Yeah. But we already have a data lifecycle management feature built into Purview.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I said it doesn't do anything is it's up to the business to decide how they want that to function. So we can control how long data needs to be kept for. We can control what happens to that data at the end of its life. So does it get deleted automatically, or does it go through some kind of review process? So we don't necessarily want to delete it straight away. We might notify somebody and leave them up to making a decision as to whether that data should be deleted. Now, of course, what we also do is we have the principles of data retention. So this is ensuring that users don't delete things that they shouldn't be deleting. So, if I was to delete a document today, what happens if the business actually needs to find that in 5 years' time? Right. It's gone, but we could also retain it for legal reasons. So, data lifecycle management in Purview is probably one of the more challenging areas, because it involves lots of different parts of the business deciding on what those timescales should be. If you talk to somebody in finance, they'll say, oh, yeah, we keep everything for 7 years.
Yeah.
If you talk to somebody in HR, they might say, well, some things we only keep for 90 days. Other things we keep for 100 years. So, it can be very challenging.
Yeah.
But we do have built into Purview, we have the mechanisms there to manage the life cycle of that data. We can also do what basically we call event-based retention. So this is where we don't know when that data needs to expire. So think about a project. We might have a legal requirement that says when that project ends, we have to remove the data within 3 years. Now, we don't know when that project's going to end. It could end tomorrow, but it could also end in 5 years' time. We don't know. So we can group documents together, and then we can say, this event has now occurred, this project's ended, therefore kick in with that data lifecycle management and go ahead and delete that data in 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. So we've got those features out of the box. It's just up to the individual business to make a decision as to what's best going to fit their needs.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep moving along. So now I'm going to bring my data inventory into the development process. Now, what I really want to build is an inventory that kind of participates and it advises. So imagine that you're building a new Power App or a new agent or flow or whatever, and instead of kind of like guessing or checking for for docs and things like that, you have this conversational interface that connects to the inventory, and it actually helps. So I could ask it, if I'll stick to HR as my example, but I could ask it, what data sets already exist for HR? Has anybody used HR data with AI before? What data is safe to use in a public facing agent? Because then I'm not just relying on kind of memory or tribal knowledge. I'm starting to build, intelligent and context aware suggestions. And this would be where my data advisor comes in. It will kick in at the start of a new build, so when we detect a new app, and it would interact with the developer to help them make the right decisions around their data. So it'd be almost like adding in a smart teammate into the development process. Now, the other thing I'd like to build into this is one of the trickier aspects of governance, and that's what happens when policies change. So AI is moving at an incredible speed, as we all know, and that means that our policies probably need to change way more frequently than what we would imagine. Maybe the organization updates its definition of what constitutes sensitive data. So now, rather than making that policy change a manual cleanup task, I would propose that I have extend my data quality agent to pick up when policies change, and to check whether existing assets kind of still meet this new bar, and if not, log them as being out of compliant, or maybe even start reassessing them. So does Purview support this kind of interactivity with users? Can business users or makers interact with its catalog, or is it mostly for kind of like data stewards and IT?
No, it's mainly for the data stewards and the IT administrators to control Purview. The users don't really interact with it in terms of creating policies or anything like that. For the administrators, the only interaction the end users would really have would be around applying labels to content. So, for example, if I'm creating a Word document, I might want to classify that as top secret or secret. As a user, I'd be able to do that because that's been made available to me by the administrators. But it wouldn't be, Purview is not something the end user would really go into.
Yeah. Is there kind of any integration with Copilot or Power Platform where people could, like query it in any kind of way?
Not at the moment, no. But there are things that are coming to address some of that. So from an agent standpoint, if we think about one of the challenges we have with every customer is it's okay creating all these labels, but if the users don't really fully understand, what they're there for, they become very challenging. So, having an agent where the user can say, hey, I've got this document. What do you think I should classify it as? It will be those kind of things that the user would interact with. Yes.
Right. Okay, cool. Good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to walk through for maybe 5 to 10 minutes of a demo. So I've started to put together, kind of elements of this data inventory that I wanted to kind of share with everybody. Just get my screens right. So as I said, this is very much a proof of concept, a demo. So I've been talking about having this central data inventory, and just to keep people grounded in the fact that this is a demo, I'm using a SharePoint list, which obviously I wouldn't do if I was building a production data inventory. But you can see I have some kind of list that has records in it, and some metadata around excuse me, around the data assets that I have. Now, the first thing I would need to do is to populate my inventory. And at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned how I would build a cloud flow that kind of iterates through over my environments, and into the various Dataverse tables that I need it to look into, and then start to extract all of the metadata that I'm interested in. So I'm just iterating over a single environment because obviously this is just a quick demo. But you can see I'm kind of returning all of the rows in the AI model table, and I'm filtering them just to remove anything that's been created by the system. So in the AI models table, you have all of your the models that are available to you through AI builders, so text translation, prediction, sentiment analysis, all of that. Now, I'm not really interested in seeing those because they're created by the system. I'm interested in seeing things that have been created by people. So I'm excluding all of that. And then I'm just simply writing it out to my SharePoint list. Now, the same with knowledge sources. I'm going to the Copilot components table. Now, all of the things that build up your Copilot, the topics, the actions, the knowledge sources, they all reside, or they're all referenced in the Copilot's component table. And the one thing that I'm really interested in is the knowledge sources. And so I'm filtering everything out that is of this particular content type. So 14 is a knowledge source. Now, if I test this and run it, what we should see is that my list starts to populate with some data assets. So just let this quickly run. Excuse me, dry throat. Okay, so we're running, and we should start to see pretty soon. Information good. At least that worked. And so you can see I'm starting to get an idea of what's available in my inventory. I know who the owner is or the person that created it. I know what it is. So bot file attachment is a document that's been used as knowledge source in Copilot. We have prompts. We have all kinds of things. Now the next thing I want to do is to use my asset ownership agent. Now this has one job, and its job is to understand who is accountable for this particular knowledge source. So it's got a trigger. So when a new data asset is created, it will run, and it will run this flow for me where I send an adaptive card to the person that created the artifact or the asset, and ask them if they are responsible for it. So we'll see if this works. If somebody is not muted. So with a bit of luck, there we go. So we start to see I've received an adaptive card. Now this is for a prompt. This is the prompt that I've created, and it's asking if I'm the person that's actually accountable for this. So if this goes wrong, if somebody wants to know how to use it or what kind of context it should be used in, they'll come to me. So I have two options. Yes, it's me, or no, it's somebody else. And I can put in the email address of whoever it is, And that kind of is the sole purpose of my accountability agent. It's just to discover who's accountable. If I quickly walk through the next one, we then have the responsible AI evaluation agent. And this has a pretty similar task. It's going to send an adaptive card. Now, I only had time to get it as far as that, but obviously we would build logic in there to be, maybe a slightly different evaluation based on the type of asset. So if it's an AI model, I would be asking way deeper questions than I would if it was a simple prompt, for example. Now, this worked earlier, and things got very busy in Teams for me. There's a few hundred of these adaptive cards. So if it works again, then that's what we would expect to see. But what it will send me is not showing, obviously. But that will send me a responsible AI evaluation. It'll ask me, am I using any PII data? Obviously, Purview kind of has all of this out of the box. By the sounds of it, this is all detected up front. So it doesn't look like that's going to work anytime soon, which is typical of a live demo. And then we have the data quality agent. So imagine that it might work in a moment. I'll give it some time before I completely write it off. But the data quality agent has a very similar task, and that is to establish if I'm using structured data, do I have missing values? Am I using any kind of sensitive features? To really understand what it is that that I'm using. And the idea being here is that after all of this is built, I have a full a fully documented data asset that can be reused by other people. Again, this is running slowly as well. I'll give it a few more minutes for this whole thing, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But what I will do is I will try to show the data quality agent, as in, like, this would be the end user facing kind of side to it, where you could ask questions. You could ask questions about the data policy. So you could ask, what's the policy on data quality or accuracy, and it will advise the developer before they get too far into building something around, what are the policies. We'd be able to ask it, is there any data that's available to use in HR use cases, or, for example, something like that. So that's my sadly the end of my kind of demo. It's not really worked as well as I'd hoped it would, but I'm sure once the meeting's finished, I'll probably be inundated with adaptive cards that arrive. For yourself, Mark, would you like to give us a whistle stop tour of Purview? Because some of us have never seen this before, so it'd be wonderful to get a good view of it.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Now, obviously, I'm conscious of time, so I can't give you the full blown Purview experience as much as I would love to. So hopefully you can see my screen okay.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So what I've done here is just gone into what we call the Data Explorer. So this is the bit where I initially mentioned that we look at content. We then look and see, does it contain certain types of sensitive data? So you can see from here, it tells me that according to its scan, I've got 682 pieces of information that have full names in them. I've got medical terms, diseases, types of medicine. If I show, I've got 27 that have got credit card numbers in them. Now I can actually then drill down and actually see where that content is. So I've got some in Exchange and I've got some in OneDrive. There's none in SharePoint, and there's none anywhere else. So this is kind of where is my data? Yeah. So these are the standard sensitive info types. But then we also have, as I mentioned, the trainable classifiers. So these are based on the machine learning. So according to this, I've got 29 pieces of information that are HR related. Now that could be resumes, it could be job applications, it could be sick notes, any number of different things. So it's not based on a regular expression. It's based on the sentiment of the content. So is it HR related?
Yeah.
So it's a pre-trained machine learning model. And again, if there aren't ones there that meet your business needs, you can train your own trainable classifiers. So right. I did some work with a court, the local courts, and they wanted a classifier for court transcripts. There isn't one out of the box, so we trained it to understand what a court transcript actually looks like.
Right, wow.
Now, what then happens is we can take these and tie those into information protection, which is where we do our sensitivity label.
Right.
So the sensitivity labels is where we would then have things confidential, highly confidential, whatever you want, again, as a business. So in my example here, I've just got public, general, confidential, internal, restricted, and HR only. So I can make those available to the end user. The end user can use them when they're creating a document. We can also give them nudges, which is really cool. So let's say that anything with a credit card number in it, we want it to be classified as restricted. As the user is typing, we're evaluating the content of that document in real time as they're typing. If we detect a credit card number, we can prompt them and say, hey, we recommend that you apply this label to this content. So we can recommend it to them, or we can force it on them. We can automatically classify the document.
Cool. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, we want to take away some of the end user having to worry about it. We want to give them the prompts to make it easy. Now, once we've done the labeling, that moves on to data loss prevention, where we can then control what can they do with that content. So if it's labeled as confidential, I don't want you sending it out via email. Now, when it comes to AI, which obviously is the focus here, we have introduced some new features around AI, particularly for Copilot. So let's say I don't want Copilot to use anything that's been classified as restricted in its responses. I can set up a data loss prevention policy that says anything that's labeled as restricted, Copilot's not going to process it, and Copilot's not going to use that in its responses. So we've got some controls there.
That's very cool. Yeah.
The other side, which we did mention, was data lifecycle management. So I'm pleased that you stole the terminology that we use in your example.
Oh, I did. Okay, that was
Team 2 came up with it first, though. So data lifecycle management. So again, this is where we're controlling how long do we keep data for.
Right.
So I could have a policy that says any email, we only keep it for 3 years and then we delete it, or whatever it is I want it to do. And again, I can create policies for email, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and also now Copilot. One of the other things from a governance standpoint is, are we making sure we know what our users are asking Copilot to do? So we might need to keep those interactions, both the prompt and the response that comes back, for legal reasons. So we can have policies in place to maintain that. And the other one I just wanted to briefly mention is risky AI usage. So from a governance standpoint, organizations want to make sure that their users are asking AI to do the right things. So are they asking AI to rewrite an email to make it sound unlike money laundering? I've written this email, it's all about money laundering. Yeah. Copilot, rewrite it for me so it doesn't sound like money laundering. That would be risky usage. Yeah. So we can pick that up. So again, we're not necessarily blocking the user from doing it, but we need to be aware of, are they doing things that really they shouldn't be doing?
That's good.
So we have this feature, and if anybody on the call's got Purview access, the SPM for AI, and this will look at your posture, and it will then give you some recommendations of things that you might want to think about turning on in Purview to help you strengthen your posture when it comes to AI usage. Now, this is not just Copilot. This can also be other Gen AI systems as well. So, ChatGPT, Gemini, all of those. So we've got a lot of things in Purview already there, ready for AI and to help customers in that journey.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to just kind of wrap up because we're nearly at time. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. Thanks again, Mark, for that.
Thank you.
I know it's a very quick demo.
Yeah, I could have done a day on that.
I know you could quite easily. Yeah. So we're kind of at the final part of the final fork in the road almost, where we've kind of spoken about two distinct approaches. Each of them have their own strengths. One was built to kind of adapt within your Power Platform ecosystem. The other is kind of grounded in the power of Purview, with built-in discovery and compliance kind of muscle almost. So the whole point of it wasn't really for you to pick a side. It was to recognize that if you want to scale responsibly, the days of treating data as an afterthought, they're kind of over, really. Whether you decide to build it or to buy it, you need to kind of own the data story. And if you're not really sure where to begin, that's what today was hopefully about. It was about starting that conversation. So commit to choosing a path that kind of aligns with what you're trying to do, with your maturity, and most importantly with the commitment to doing it responsibly. So I'm going to hand back over to Ashley now, just to wrap us up.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Steve, if you can go back to the deck. And while Steve is doing that, I just want to say thank you to our audience. You guys have been wonderful. And keep coming back. So have a great morning, evening, night, and we'll see you next session.